Hey guys, Christy here with Little Roots Ranch, and today I want to talk about four tips. I was gonna say four, I guess that's eight. Four tips for that to really keep in mind if you're doing container gardening. Now, I think container gardening is fabulous, and there's a lot of reasons why somebody would container garden. Number one, they just want to. Or if they have really bad soil, whether it be like rocky or contaminated. Three, if you're living in an apartment or have a smaller growing area, like a little patio, or you just want to grow some like lettuce or something up by the house or on a deck or whatever. The reasons are numerous. And I know that a lot of you have asked if I do container gardening. And the answer is no, not really. Not because I'm against container gardening, but because I have a lot of room and I grow on a large scale, and so it's not really feasible and definitely not earth friendly to acquire that many containers and stuff like that. So though I am not against container gardening, I personally don't use it. But I have grown things in containers in the past, and I think that there are four things that you really need to be aware of when you're container gardening. And the biggest one, which I'll start with, and this is really important, especially if you're a new gardener and especially if you haven't grown in a container. So a container or pot, whatever, is, we all know what a pot or container is. But one thing to know about that is they dry out really fast. And that's usually from heat and or the wind. Because in the earth, it holds like the moisture, and the plants, depending on what kind they are, can like mine down for like moisture and nutrients and things like that. With a pot or a container, that's not how it happens. Not only that, but like let's say most pots or containers are black, and usually you've got things, especially garden stuff, in the sun, right? Because they need full sun. But that sun is beating down and heating up that black plastic, one, increasing the absorption rate of water, and also making it too hot, especially for temperature sensitive vegetables like say cauliflower that don't like to swing back and forth. So if you're growing in containers, you really want to be careful that you're watering them. And a lot of times you need to water every day. I was reading that if it's above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, not that happens too often here in the Pacific Northwest, but when it does happen, that it's recommended to water twice a day, especially for vegetables that love a lot of water. And so that was the biggest downfall when I did more container gardening, and that was the year that I moved to this farm, because I started from a previous like smaller, like more residential area. And so I planted in a lot of like grow bags or whatever, and then moved them. First of all, that was a mess. But second of all, I found that it was difficult to keep up with the watering requirements. That was also coupled with the fact that I was setting up a new farm. And so like it's give and take, but I had to make sure I blocked out time every day to make sure I watered my like containers, grow bags, whatever, pots. Because if I didn't, then they would just shrivel up, especially heat sensitive ones, basically the brassica family, which is like cauliflower, cabbage, all of those things, or greens, things that are sensitive to that. So the first tip is definitely be aware that you need to make sure that you're giving water to those plants, because when you've got them in a pot, there is nowhere else for them to mine it from. The second thing, and this kind of is the opposite of the first one, but if you're just growing vegetables in the summer, then it doesn't make a difference. But if you're looking to overwinter, the same reasons that the pot gets warmer in the summer, it gets colder in the winter. Excuse me. And that's really important to note, because like if you overwinter, let's say the same cabbage plant in the ground and in a container, and the temperature gets low enough, your plant in the ground will last longer than your plant in the container, because the pot has so many, obviously 360 degrees of cold air or freezing temperatures that can hit it, whereas the ground is more insulating. So that's something to be aware of. Now, there's also things like one of these days, I'm gonna grow my Meyer lemon tree. I cannot wait, but it's on the list at some point. So I'll let you know when I get one ever. But with that, I will grow in a container and then move it inside or in the greenhouse, or I have to research that a little bit more. But that is one of the handy things about growing in containers is that you can move them. But basically the second point is to be careful with temperatures, especially cold temperatures, because it doesn't provide as much warmth. Like a lot of this last freezing temperatures we had at the end of December, all of my rosemary in containers didn't make it, or at least it looks like they're not gonna make it, fingers crossed. But rosemary in the ground did, you know, and so that's a little bit of the difference. The third thing that you want to know is that, again, going back to plants in the ground, the reason they put out, and this kind of ties into the fourth point a little bit, but the reason that they have big root systems is to go in and mine like nutrients and water and all of that stuff, right? And so when you have a pot, then you are restricting that, of course. And so that means that you need to help out as far as providing those things. So we already talked about water, but nutrition is another one, because if whatever you put in the pot to start off with, which it should be a potting mix, there's a lot of growing mediums, but potting mix is specifically designed for pots and container gardens because it, for one, for drainage, two, for water retention to make it through those hot days, and three, for nutrients, usually, depending on what you're purchasing. But you'll need, that will only last so long, especially if you're growing something that requires a lot of nutrition. If you're growing like lettuce, which has pretty low demands, that's gonna be okay. Also, a lot of the stuff like in fertilizers, and I don't just mean like chemical ones, which are included, of course, but even if you put like chicken manure down, nitrogen is exceptionally water soluble and it'll just go right out those drainage holes. And so that's something that you want to be aware of. It's really important. And so again, to recap, tip number 3 was to make sure that you are feeding your plants. And the fourth tip is, and this is really, really important, I think this is the mistake up there with watering that a lot of people make, is that if you have to know, or you have to use the correct size pot for the correct plant. So if you're growing, like for instance, garlic or onion, really small root systems. I mean, if you pulled them out of the ground, you see the whole kit and caboodle, and it's a tiny little thing, right? And so garlic, for instance, would do excellent in a smaller pot. But I see a lot of people putting tomato in that same plant, in that same size pot. But the thing is you want to go online and check out how big of a root system different things develop. Now, granted, they can make do with a little less, obviously, but it's a give and take, right? Your plant's going to be stunted a little bit. But if you, like tomatoes, for instance, tomato roots can grow up to 2 to 3 feet in length in the ground. Now, if you have them in a pot, obviously they're going to be restricted. But with tomatoes, most of the root core is in the first 12 inches. And so I've seen a lot of people a few people have a lot of success with growing tomatoes in like 5-gallon buckets. Make sure you add the drainage holes, or also 7.5-gallon buckets. 7.5-gallon buckets. And what's great about those buckets in particular, or whatever bucket or container you're looking for, is that how wide it is important, of course, but also more important is the depth. I mean, you can't have like a tiny hole and it be really deep, though that would be way better than being really wide and very shallow. Because you want that root to be able to go down in there and shed its like little like extra roots or whatever, and like try and get all the stuff out of the potting soil and collect all the water that's in there and all that stuff. So if, like I said, you can just Google that to figure out like what size you should look for. And there's a website, I think it's the extension for Washington State, like actually lists like deep rooted, shallow rooted, medium rooted. If I can find the link and I remember, I'll put it down below the video. But that's something to be aware of. So again, to recap all of that, container gardening, excellent. I personally, I don't grow in containers just because for me, the size, it would be so wasteful, you know, but there are some things like mints and stuff like that that I'll grow, or now I've moved more into like a raised bed, like say a 4x4 or a 4x8, 4 feet by 8 feet. And then I'll plant all of the mint in there, or all of the, like I'm getting horseradish, which spreads real easy, and I'll contain that. Chamomile is the same way. Things that you want to control, you definitely want to put them in there. But if you are container gardening, you definitely want to make sure you're watering enough, you're accounting for like the temperature differences, especially, you know, cold nights, things like that, or in the fall when it starts cooling off, your containers will cool down faster. You want to make sure you're feeding them, the plants that are in containers, and you want to make sure that that you have the correct size. Because even if you do everything perfect, if you have a little container for a plant that needs a lot of room, it's just not going to be able to get there, and so you're going to have a smaller plant, yields will be affected, things like that. Ultimately, you'll usually always get something no matter what, but you want to set yourself up for the best of success. And I want you to be set up for the best of success, because I want you to love gardening and, you know, feeding your family, yourself, or anything like that. So I hope that thank you for watching, and I hope this was informative. If you have any questions or anything like that, drop it down below. If you're an experienced container gardener, because I am not, I just did a little bit of it. If you want to put down below for others to see like how many gallon pot you like have grown things in, or any recommendations that are above and beyond like whatever I said, that would be really excellent, because then we can all just learn from each other. But anyways, happy gardening. Thank you for watching. Bye.